Welcome back. And in line with the discussion about the different kinds of forces, let us focus on one of the example of these contact force, and that is frictional force. In terms of, remember when I told you about you have to consider the surface of the surfaces of the object, like when there is a smooth surface and then the other one has a rough surface, remember the effect on the motion of the object. Like in this case, completely there's no frictional force, right? The reason why the object continues to move. But if there's friction, they may somehow try to or be able to stop the object from moving, right? So let's focus on friction. What is this all about? Friction opposes motion. Always remember that. The function of friction, or what makes friction unique, it always opposes the movement of the object. Look at this animation. I want you to understand how the surfaces of the two objects act on each other. It causes the object to slow down when it's moving, and eventually it will stop the object from moving. That is what force is doing to the movement of the object. The application of friction is illustrated if you let a coin roll on the floor, right? It will stop depending on, again, the surface. In the absence of air resistance force, I want you to think about this. Air resistance force, as part of our review, is a special kind of friction, but it only happens when the object is traveling through air. Now, in these two objects, heavy and light, which one will reach the ground first? So let's take a look. Remember when I told you that in the absence of air resistance force, whether the object is light or heavy, they will reach the ground at the same time. The heavy round object will reach the ground first because there is another force that affects the feather, right? That is the air resistance. Since the heavy object is heavy, the pull of gravity is also greater on the heavy object. And there is a force that is against this gravitational force. It stops the feather, since it's light in mass, it stops the feather to move down, or it slows down the movement on the ground, down to the ground. So that's what happened when there is air resistance force. But removing the air resistance force, then both of them will reach the ground at the same time. Air friction or resistance affects the motion of falling objects by acting against the force of gravity. Now that we're talking about frictional force, I'm going to tell you the different kinds of frictional force. And a special kind of it is the air resistance, right? It affects the motion of falling objects by acting against the force of gravity. Friction is a force that precedes or opposes the relative sliding movement of surfaces in contact with one another. Remember that it is the one that opposes the sliding movement. So from that two examples, let's take a look of the different kinds of friction. First, I have here the rolling friction. It happens when an object rolls over a surface and rolling friction is produced. If, like what I said, you consider the surface of the two objects and they are rough, the rougher the surface, the greater the frictional force. So if this object is rolling on the ground with a higher or with a rough surface, then this object will stop from rolling. Again, we call that rolling friction. Another is sliding friction, also called dry friction. The rougher the surface, the greater the friction. The reason why, as you take a look at this, man, sliding on a grassy ground, he stops, right? Again, sliding friction. Another friction is called fluid friction. It occurs when a solid object moves through a fluid. Fluids such as water, air, and oil, they have this kind of friction. There you go. So those are the different examples of friction. We have the rolling, the sliding, and the liquid friction. So that's it. I hope you enjoy and learn from this review. Thank you very much.